I was a seminary professor for 20 years, and in that time, I encountered my share of theological bullies. So these are people who attempt to censure questioning or what are perceived to be divergent opinions to their understanding of orthodoxy, often by using intimidating, threatening language, attempting to enforce conformity and to expel anybody from the in group that they perceive has deviated from their standard of orthodoxy. And I've met a lot of people like that. Now, in fairness, I kind of look for trouble, you could say, because I've never been one to withhold my opinions. I'm not like some faculty who would tiptoe around controversial theological topics until they got tenure, or maybe even after they got tenure, because as you probably know, if you teach at a Christian institution, there's a good chance that tenure won't protect you from what are perceived to be doctrinal deviations. So, with that in mind, however, I've always spoken my mind, like in the late 2000s when I started writing and speaking on the topic of biblical violence and critiquing well known evangelicals like Paul Copan, even though I didn't have tenure. But I thought this is important. We're talking here about issues like genocide, killing civilians. I need to speak out against some of the defenses of particular readings of the biblical text that I'm hearing from evangelicals. So I took a stand not knowing how it might adversely impact my employment, but I felt it was important and I was going to develop and present arguments that I could stand behind with integrity. And the bigger philosophical issue here is that I've always been sought to model myself, I'll say, after the Bereans of Acts 17. So this is a synagogue that Paul came to. Paul teaches this new orthodoxy, this new idea that this Rabbi Jesus was crucified and was raised and shown to be the Messiah through this inexplicable, unprecedented act. And it would be at a moment like that that the theological bullies would attempt to quiet Paul, which happened at many other synagogues. But at the synagogue of Berea, they welcomed Paul and they kept an open mind and they looked for evidence to see whether what he was saying was true. And that should be our stance when people take theological positions that we think maybe are provocative, that are deviant according to our understanding of orthodoxy. Keep an open mind and evaluate the evidence. Don't try to just shut them down and be a theological bully. So, anyway, then I don't know, 2011 and 12, somewhere in there, I applied for tenure. And the process of tenure, which should have taken a few months, ended up taking almost 2 years because there was some small but vocal, I would say, or determined opposition to me getting tenure on doctrinal grounds. Once again, the theological bullies. One of the issues at that time was that I had spoken out in defense of inclusivism, the idea that one can be reconciled to God in Christ without having prayed a sinner's prayer. Essentially, that's inclusivism, that you can be reconciled to God in Christ without having uh, identified as a Christian as such. And that is very threatening to some people. And it was threatening, I know, to one individual. And this is where it is so key as to how you respond to theological bullies. So, if you're in a traditional evangelical setting, for example, the idea of a conversion is very important, right? It's called a conversionist tradition. It's one of the four hallmarks of evangelicalism, according to Bebbington's definition of evangelical. And so, the idea that there was some moment where you became a Christian and began to follow Jesus becomes very important in evangelical self-understanding. And then evangelicals can go to passages to support this view, not only that conversion should be a normative expectation, but maybe even is essential to a reconciled, restored relationship with God in Christ. And so you could go, for example, to Romans 10:9, where Paul says, if you believe or that Jesus, if you confess with your mouth that Jesus is Lord and believe in your heart God raised him from the dead, you will be saved. And they could say, look, that implies or entails exclusivism, that you have to pray the sinner's prayer, that we read in the book of Acts, there is no other name by which you are saved. Now, there's of course an inclusivist response to all of these things. And there's a reason why people are inclusivists and they are aware of Romans 10:9 and how exclusivists interpret it, or Acts 4:12 or some other passage. But in that moment, it's like a boxing match. So if you're in a boxing match, and I'm not a boxer, I don't, and not only do I not box, I don't follow boxing, but I know this much, that you don't want to get on the ropes, because the second you get on the ropes, and that other individual can begin to land punches, then you could be done for. I think it was Mike Tyson who said something to the effect of everybody's got a great plan until they get punched in the face, right? And that is true literally, but it's also true figuratively, that the second you are put on the defense, you get a punch in the face, it becomes very difficult to get your focus and be able to return punches, as it were, and continue and be successful in the fight. That's also true in intellectual debate. If a person can put you on the defense, if they can put you on the ropes, if they can frame the position you've taken in a particular way that puts you on the defense, like, why are you questioning the Bible? Why are you questioning what Jesus clearly says? Why are you questioning what Paul says? Why are you questioning the exclusivity of Christ? And these things could all put you then on the defense, and you now are trying to recover constantly. Then that can just simply perpetuate the power of the theological bully to silence you, to frame you as an outsider, as a heretic, as dangerous. In those moments, it is so important to avoid their punches and to get off of the ropes and reframe the topic to instead maybe put them on the ropes. So I was in a meeting, and this one individual who didn't want me to get tenure raised this concern, this objection, that I believe that people could be saved, could be restored to God in Christ without having prayed a sinner's prayer. And that seemed to contradict the Bible. And what would that do to mission and evangelism and proclamation? And how is that consistent with our North American Baptist statement of beliefs, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera? It would be easy in that moment to get on the defense and begin to take hits and just maybe get um, angry, frustrated, not be able to think clearly, and you're done. You're cooked at that point. So it's so important to reframe the issue. So this is how I reframed the issue. I said, look, a 10-year-old Jewish girl in Auschwitz, she rejects Christianity that has been presented to her, but the Christianity she's rejected is the Christianity of the Third Reich. And then she goes and is sent to the gas chamber and killed. Are you saying that to teach at this seminary, I have to believe that that 10-year-old girl who died in Auschwitz went to hell? And that guy glared back at me, but offered no reply. What I had done by that simple thought experiment, followed by a question, was I reframed the topic to expecting obliging faculty to believe that Jewish girls who die in Auschwitz without having converted to Christianity are in hell. That's what he was committed to by implication, and what he was obliging me to be committed to. And I don't think anybody wanted to accept that as an implication or a requirement of employment. And that, I think, was a key moment to kind of shut down some of those objections. And I was awarded tenure a while later. And I didn't hear concerns about inclusivism again. And that's what you have to do when you encounter a theological bully, is to don't lose your cool. Don't allow them to frame the issue, place you on the ropes, as it were. Reframe the issue in a way that gets to the heart of the point and helps everybody to understand what is really at stake here. It's not your orthodoxy, it's their expectation that they have some hot take on a theological issue that they're trying to impose on everybody else. And there are very well maybe implications they have never even thought of that flow from that, which make their view very unpalatable and very problematic. And that's my quick response about how to respond to theological bullies. Now, let me say one more thing before I conclude, and this is just more broadly on inclusivism and how I responded. I mean, I could have gone in all sorts of ways to talk about, are you saying that children who die in infancy go to hell? You know, talk about, that's what we would call low-hanging fruit, right? What about people who do not have the cognitive ability to make a confession? But actually, I went for something a little more interesting and perhaps provocative, which is somebody who had ostensibly received a proclamation of the gospel and still had declined it, the Jewish girl in Auschwitz. She was aware of Christianity through the Lutheran Third Reich Christianity and rejected it. But what I was doing there was really putting the onus back on Christians, including this theological bully, by pointing out that you are so quick to judge the theology of other people. Have you judged your own theology? It's not just about the extreme case of the Third Reich Church. What about the North American church, evangelical MAGA Christian church today? So let's say some Mexican migrants are have refugee status and they come to a church in Texas that is a MAGA church that does not welcome them. And they end up rejecting Christianity because they've been repudiated by the church, which is more conformed to the image of Donald Trump than of Jesus Christ. Have they rejected Christianity at all? Or is the real problem, the real concern with that church, or more generally with theological bullies? And so my illustration, not only of the Jewish girl in Auschwitz, was not only reframing the question to put the power, to reclaim power and put the bully on the defense, but it was also to make a longer term, bigger theological point about how quick Christians are to judge the orthodoxy of others when their own orthopraxy may have corrupted their orthodoxy beyond recognition.